This is the On All Cylinders podcast,
powered by Summit Racing.
Your host for today is Paul Sokolis, with special guests Mike Norcia and Matt Giangrande from Ram Clutches.
Here we go.
Buckle up, folks, because we got another great episode on tap. This is the On All Cylinders podcast. Paul Sokolis in your host chair. And if you like to row your own gears, you're going to want to listen up, because we are going to be talking all day about clutch tech. Clutch design, clutch setup, clutch materials, and all that good stuff. And to do that, we brought in a pair of experts, and I don't use that term lightly. Joining us, Mike Norcia, co-owner of Ram Clutches, and Matt Giangrande, director of business development for Ram Clutches. These two guys know more about clutches than any other person I've ever met, and they are more than happy to share that brain power with us today. Gentlemen, how we doing?
Just fantastic. Thanks.
Doing great, Paul.
Yeah, well, thank you again for carving out some time to share your brain power with us. Now, we'll get to the brass tacks of our clutch conversation here in a moment, but I want to hear from you on a personal note. How do you two become gearheads? And I know this is an easy question for Mike to answer, but for Matt, what brought you to Ram Clutches?
Well, basically it's a family business, and my dad started it around 1972, and my brother and I both joined in the early 1980s. And we've been in it pretty much our whole lives. If you went back and looked at, when we actually started working, I was 13 years old and started working in the shop in summers, and my brother wasn't having any of that. He was 11. He said, I'm getting in there too. So this is actually the 50th year for both of us of working in some capacity within the company.
And it is absolutely worth mentioning that Ram Clutches began just kind of a stone's throw from the Summit Racing World headquarters in nearby Canton, Ohio. So you're a Northeast Ohio family, right?
Yeah, we certainly are. I was born and raised in Canton, Ohio, and was there through college. The company, I think I mentioned, started in 1972. So Pat and I were going to the races. We were in Columbus at the Spring Nationals at, very young age, watching all that kind of fun stuff. And as it progressed and we got to the point where both of us were in college and getting ready to graduate, my parents had gotten kind of tired of the snow and decided it was time to move to the South. And my mom really liked Myrtle Beach. So they happened to be going on a trip to Myrtle Beach and made a wrong turn and ended up in downtown Columbia. Well, she fell in love with it, the old Southern charm kind of thing. And so my dad kind of started looking into it and spoke with some of the development people and stuff around here, and they seemed kind of anxious to have us. So in 1983, we opened our building here in Columbia, and this is where we sit since then.
As a guy who once lived down south in Virginia Beach and moved the other way to Northeast Ohio, I can appreciate the sentiment of not wanting a whole lot of snow.
We get it about once a year, and that's good enough.
But we digress. So anyway, it's fair to say that you two both know an awful lot about clutches.
Absolutely. And I really want Matt to kind of jump in, because he tends to be a little shy, but he is campaigns a Mountain Motor Pro Stock car in IHRA and some of the other sanctioning bodies out there. So he brings a real wealth of knowledge on the racing side to our business, as well as what he's done for us in sales and on the street side.
And I guess I'll expand on that. Like Mike said, sometimes I can be shy, not too often, but sometimes I can be. But I've been a car guy all my life. Like I like to say, Paul, this is not my job; it's my lifestyle. Just like a lot of people within our company, it's not a job; it's a lifestyle. So I've been playing with cars in some capacity, from a very young age. The old Snake and Mongoose Hot Wheels sets. So I'm kind of dating myself now, of course. But one thing led to another. And I've been, again, a car geek right from the get-go, wanting to go fast with my hair on fire, which I don't have any more of anymore. But like Mike said, I'm lucky enough to campaign a Mountain Motor Pro Stock car now, which is a lot of fun. But along the way, you kind of make your natural progressions from a really sporty street car to a street strip car, and you kind of, again, learn as you go along. So while I feel like I bring a wealth of knowledge, I appreciate the kind words from Mike. Mike has forgotten more than I'll ever know about clutches. He's our walking encyclopedia. And I'll have to tell you that about him, because he won't tell you that. But, whether it's a Fox body Mustang or a GMF body 93, 97 Camaro Firebird or a new late model Camaro Challenger Mustang, which, if there's one thing we know about clutches, one size does not fit all. So where it might take me, a half hour or an hour to kind of figure out what we got to put together, I can call him up and in a matter of 30 seconds, man, he could rattle that thing off like there's no tomorrow. So he's kind of like our secret weapon. You could ask him car, make, model, transmission, and you've got the package built in no time.
Well, I think that dovetails nicely into the start of our clutch conversation. Now, working for Summit Racing means I'm privileged to be able to know what kind of questions our own tech support lines are getting. And one of the biggest that bubbles to the surface a lot is, should I go with a single disc or a twin disc setup in my car? So let's begin there. Can you talk about the pros and cons of a single disc versus a dual disc clutch setup?
Absolutely. And, the car dealers, manufacturers, I should say, kind of set the stage for this as well, because most any of the newer late model cars you get are going to come with a dual disc clutch. So in the beginning, it was kind of hard because it was a new concept for people. They, didn't really understand why would I ever want to run a dual disc, which is exactly the question you're asking here. What really happens is you get into, at some point, a certain gray area in the power level of the car or how the car is being used, that you have to make a decision between, am I going to use a very aggressive single disc clutch to be able to hold the power of what I have, or can I use a dual disc, which it actually does exactly what you would think. Two discs, you're nearly doubling what the capacity of the clutch is. So consequently, if you have a, say, 500 to 600 horsepower car, where you might have to run a single disc that's kind of aggressive on the engagement, you can run a dual disc and use, say, an organic friction material, get a very smooth engagement, and yet still be able to hold that power. So really kind of educating people to the fact that, the drivability can be a whole lot better with the dual disc, even if you may not even be quite to that power level where you need it. The other side where that can really be important is if a lot of people build their cars in stages. This year you might do some bolt-ons or an airbox or something like that. Next year it's going to be headers, and then, I think it's time to do a head and cam, or I'm going to throw nitrous, or I'm going to throw a supercharger on there. If you need a clutch and you get that dual disc in from the start, you've got something you can progressively build on as the car grows, and you don't end up having to upgrade the clutch each time you do make a change.
You know what? We should mention something that, if you're totally new to this, clutches can be kind of a trade-off. And here specifically what we're talking about is how much pressure and how quickly the clutch engages kind of correlates to how much pedal effort you need to use. Not a big deal if the car is destined for only the drag strip, but certainly a major consideration if you don't want your left leg to get sore on your day-to-day commute grind, right?
Yeah, and it's not just the pedal effort necessarily, but it could also be the aggressiveness of the friction disc that's used, because usually when we're gonna try to increase the capacity of a single disc unit, you're going to use some combination of static pressure, which is going to affect that pedal feel, and friction material, which when you use a higher coefficient of friction material like a metallic or something like that, they're going to be a little more aggressive engaging. Not a whole lot different than if you use metallic brakes versus an organic brake. It's going to be a very similar situation.
That's a great topic to talk about next, because if you're out there shopping for a clutch, you're going to see different friction materials. You're going to see organic, you're going to see sintered metal, you're going to see ceramic. So expand on some of the nuances between those friction materials.
Sure. Well, most of your basic clutches you see in factory cars are going to have some sort of an organic friction material. Organic has got a little lower coefficient of friction, meaning its ability to stand up to heat is not quite as good. So it doesn't provide quite as much, I would say, not really engagement aggressiveness, but it's going to be a softer feel. So if a guy was, say, doing restoring a muscle car, or just doing a very basic build on a car, you're probably going to stay with something that's more like an organic friction material, because it's going to give you a lot better drivability. So a combination of more static pressure or clamp load and organic will get you there in that situation. But as those power levels build, or the use of the vehicle starts to change to where, it's not just a street car. Maybe I'm going to take this to the track once a month, or I'm going to put a sticky tire on the car. These are all things that we call load factors, that are what we use to really determine what you would use to prescribe a certain clutch for a certain application. So as those uses and power levels grow, you start to get it more into something where, like a power grip disc, where we're using a dual-sided facing material. We use organic on the flywheel side and a metallic on the pressure plate side. That's going to give you a little more of a balance of increase in holding power, but still maintain some pretty good drivability. Then when you jump up to, say, a top level single disc, that's going to have a full metallic facing. So that's going to be the more crisp engagement you're going to feel, and it's going to hold up better because it has a higher coefficient of friction and can stand up to the heat better. It's going to do better in a severe duty situation where maybe that car is going to the track 50% of the time or 40% of the time, or maybe even more. The guy's going to get, or girl's going to get better life out of the clutch by doing that.
If I may, let me jump in. So some of this might sound intimidated to the audience. So the one thing we want to do is make sure they understand that there's no application that we can't recommend the clutch for. And what it really comes down to is the customer understanding their expectations and really managing their expectations. Like Mike hit on a topic that we try and do, and that is trying to get the customer to qualify how they're going to drive the car. Is it a street strip car? That's a very common term that we hear, street strip. Now, that could mean it's going to go to the racetrack 10% of the time and be street driven 90% of the time, or vice versa. So at that point, we feel we do a really good job. Something we really do good at Ram is we do a good job of questioning the customer and trying to do our best to meet their expectations, because a clutch, unlike some other projects you might take on in a car, is not something you want to do more than once if you don't have to. So a little upfront planning, preparation, and good, honest feedback from the customer helps us put them in the box they need to be in, whether it be the Power Grip HD. Because Mike just talked about a lot of options, a lot of cars that will fit into those categories, but the customer in a lot of cases doesn't know exactly what is the best fit for their car. And what we run into a lot, you get a customer call up and said, hey, I got a buddy of mine that has got this car and it runs a certain way. And we're all guilty of this. We want to outdo our buddies, right? We want to have a faster car, a more spirited driver. However, at the end of the day, when that customer might buy that clutch to outdo his buddy, when he goes to get ice cream with his wife or his girlfriend, or even they try and drive it from time to time, that might not meet those expectations. Goes back to those expectations. And again, a good cross-examination up front, answering some questions might seem like a waste of time, but it will pay dividends in the long run.
That's the hardest thing, really, is to get the customer to tell us what they want or what they feel like they need.
And just scrolling through all the Ram clutches available at summitracing.com, it presents a very good dilemma in that you have an impressive mix of clutch options. And I say that's a dilemma because if you don't know precisely what you're looking for, all those clutch options could be overwhelming. Is that a fair assessment?
That's absolutely correct. While that is great because we can cover everything and basically put something in just about anybody's car, to a customer that might be a little uncertain, sometimes too many choices or having choices like that could be a little daunting, could be a little intimidating. So just a quick email, a quick phone call. Don't hesitate to include the experts like us. We'll be happy to kind of guide you through the selection process. Like I said, options are great, but to the person that is on the fence about what they need, sometimes again could be a little confusing. So don't ever hesitate to reach out. That's really some of the best advice we can give. Don't ever hesitate to reach out. We're happy to help. This way, again, we meet the expectations, and you'll be happy with the part the first time and tell all your friends.
And now, if you do want to reach out to the experts at Ram Clutches, the website's really easy to remember: ramclutches.com. And I'm assuming that's the best way for a potential customer to reach out to you?
Yeah, we do have a really good, what we call an e-tech form on the website that enables the customer to give us all the basic details about the vehicle that we would need. If they call me on the phone, these are the exact questions I would ask. The nice thing about doing that is, sometimes you get an inquiry from somebody and you really have to sit back and think about it a little bit, what might be the best choice. So, when you're on the phone, you're kind of on the spot. You got to make a decision right at that moment. But when we have that e-tech in front of you, you can sit it and kind of stew on it for a few minutes and really try to come up with the best options.
And what's that address again?
It's ramclutches.com.
Okay, so far we've been talking about like best practices or like the best tactics to select a clutch for your vehicle. But let's flip that question around a little bit. You answer your tech support lines all day long. So you're talking with people all about clutches all day. What are some mistakes you see? What are some questions that you're always answering?
Well, I think Matt already touched on one of the biggest things, which is the expectations of what the customer really wants it to do. It is probably a tendency to think, more is good, then more than that must be better. So, if I jump up to the best one, maybe that's, I know I'm going to have something that's going to hold, but it may not meet those drivability expectations. So that's probably one of the biggest things that we run across. And it's really kind of hard sometimes to get people to tell you. And sometimes they don't tell you the truth. I don't go to oh no, I'll never take it to the track. And then, they're the next thing 2 weeks later, they're at the racetrack beating the crap out of it. So.
And I'll expand on that a little bit too. Something that is very important that we feel like could be improved in a lot of cases on our calls is the planning and preparation of the job, of the project. So while it might, again, seem very trivial and very basic, that there's a lot of things that should be thought about, up front. Are you going to take on the job yourself? Are you going to have an installer do it for you? Do you have the right tools? A clutch, a lot of people think, is a pretty rudimentary, how difficult can it be type of part to put in. When there's some truth to that, but to do it correctly and to optimize the performance of it is in the details. So doing a little upfront work, planning, preparation is probably a really important piece of advice that we feel we try and get the customer to kind of understand how important that is.
Matt touched on the installer thing, and that's really an important thing too. Is you can't be afraid to qualify the person that's going to install your clutch. We find that the customers that have the best success are usually dealing with someone who might be a specialist on that particular vehicle. They've done that job before in the past. They know what's involved. They're willing to take the extra steps that need to be taken to make sure it's done right. So just qualifying who you're going to get to do it is very important. And of course, if you have the knowledge to do it yourself, that's great. Doing the proper homework and stuff on the front end to know what you need to do. It's certainly a whole lot easier to put a clutch in a 69 Camaro than it is in a 2016 Challenger. So, what might be super easy for one guy might not be so much for another.
We're kind of tiptoeing close to a topic I wanted to discuss anyway, so I'll bring it up now. I'm an old Jeep CJ guy, so I've got a mechanical manual bell crank on my clutch pedal. It's a lever that moves another lever. That's really easy to understand, but I'd venture to guess most cars on the road today use a hydraulic clutch system. Obviously the modern cars do, and hydraulic clutch systems have now been around for a pretty long time. So does that add another significant layer of complexity? Talk about hydraulic clutch setups for a second.
Absolutely. And pretty much when you get to about a year 1996, 1997 in vehicles, that's really where most of the manufacturers started going to hydraulics, and in particular, what we call internal hydraulics. And that's a hydraulic bearing that's going to usually mount on the front of the transmission. And that's actuated by a master cylinder, on the firewall, typical deal. But there's a lot of nuances and technical things involved with hydraulics that you really need to be paid attention to when you're doing an install. For instance, we do a complete line of aftermarket hydraulic bearings that fit most any of the later model transmissions, your Tremec 5 and 6 speeds, the TKOs, the TKXs, the 6 speeds, the Magnums, all of those. And a hydraulic bearing is a great way to set a clutch system up in one of these cars. But it's a little bit more work, and it's not more work in physical, it's a little bit of mental work, because the preparation is really a lot of measuring. It's measuring to get the bearing set up at the proper height in the car so that the bearing is going to disengage the clutch properly, but also that you're leaving enough room for the clutch to wear over time. So we try to make that very easy with video, with worksheets to help you do that, and kind of guide you through what that process is. It's really a matter of taking your time, measure once, measure twice, measure the third time, and that saves that transmission having to come in and out 3 or 4 times. And again, the technical aspect there, what we can do for you on our end. Another tech form we keep on the site is a hydraulics troubleshooting form. And if somebody's doing an install on hydraulics and they have a specific question, they can give us the details on the vehicle and what part they're using, and hopefully the measurements that they're coming up with. And it can be very easy for us to say, yes, you've got that set correct, or no, really, you should have that gap at this XX number, and you should add another shim to it, or take a shim out, or whatever it might be. So it can be a little daunting, but you really have to be able to measure. It's not yardstick stuff, it's dial caliper stuff. So taking that little bit of extra time to make sure you get all that right on the front end is a huge help.
Paul, you bring up the Jeep and the mechanical linkage, and I hear you loud and clear, because all my early cars were, early generation Camaros or Chevelles, and Muncie 4-speeds, and had the Z-bar and all. And something that's very common nowadays, again, is to retrofit cars that were not originally 4-speed cars with hydraulics. That's a common situation too. It's easy to buy some pedal assemblies to put in the car, and then you can buy the hydraulics like Mike just got done talking about. And it really does make it simple. And once again, there is some upfront work to do. We have some great videos on our YouTube page, which are very, very helpful. The worksheet, like Mike called out, is great because it's really just addition and subtraction, taking some measurements, putting them into the form. It's very easy to do. And once again, we're always there to help. But the videos really, I'm kind of like I want to see the kind of stuff type of guy. I feel like I kind of respond better to that. I feel like our customers do too. So videos are available on our YouTube page to talk about the retrofitting of said hydraulics, or even just stepping up from a factory hydraulic system to the Ram hydraulic system. Ultimately, there's more adjustability with our parts. They're more robust, usually means a longer life. So don't be afraid. Don't ever be afraid. Again, it kind of goes back to the clutch. Not difficult, just a little upfront preparing and planning, and you'll have a fantastic installation that'll last you for years.
Speaking of preparing and planning, again, you guys answer your phones a lot, so you'll probably have really good insight into this question. Is there anything that's commonly overlooked when talking about upgrading or replacing a clutch? Is there a common component or a common facet that you hear on your phone lines that says, oh man, I wish I would have thought of this?
I think the biggest thing is taking into account, a lot of people will say, the call starts out like this. I have a 69 Camaro, it's 500 horsepower. What clutch do I need? Well, there's so many other factors involved in making that decision, and they're what we refer to as the load factor. What's the vehicle weigh? How much tire is on it? How is the car geared? Well, the power level is certainly important. And again, most importantly, how is that car going to be used? And getting an honest answer there is really the key to picking the right clutch. There's certainly some downstream effects that could occur. You may end up upgrading a drive shaft. You may end up changing rear gearing. Things like that can occur to help optimize the combination. But mainly is not thinking of the clutch just kind of as a Band-Aid that's going to cover everything, because there's going to be other items down the road that you're going to have to deal with.
And to be even more specific than that, Paul, I think something that I personally run across is qualifying the parts you have and qualifying the parts that you might think you want to use. So and that a lot of that is dependent upon the bell housing. Everything is inside the bell housing. So the size of the bell housing is a big determining factor regarding whether it be flywheel size, clutch size, the depth of the bell housing. So again, that's where I think our questionnaire or questioning really, really helps, because a lot of times the customer has a light bulb moment where they say, oh, well, okay, this isn't as easy as I thought, but as long as I answer the questions honestly and again, have as much forward thinking as they can, there's nothing that we can't work through.
A great example of that, I think, is there's a lot of T56 transmissions out there in the market right now, secondhand, and the 93 to 97 F-body cars had a particular T56 that used a unique clutch that was what they call a pull style. Instead of the fingers pushing to disengage, they pull. Well, these transmissions end up, somebody goes out and buys one of these things. They have no idea that that's the case. And so somebody inquires, I've got this T56 transmission, and that's the very first question I'm going to ask them is, where did that thing come from? Was it out of another vehicle? Because that's going to require a very specific package to go in with that particular transmission to make that work. We do kits that convert that pull style clutch to a push, and that affects, like I say, all those F-body cars, 93 to 97, but also all the C4 Corvettes that were produced pretty much 89 to 96. So all those vehicles, a lot of those guys buy those cars, they have no idea what clutch is in there until they dig in.
All right, this may be a dumb question, but Summit Racing pays me to ask it, so I'm going to power through. I know there's a myriad of variables at play, but does a clutch have a specific lifespan? Or to ask the question a different way, if someone's got a clutch and they can already feel it's wearing out after only a couple of thousand miles, what can contribute to the premature wear of a clutch system?
Sure. And the answer is exactly what you might think. No, I can't give you a good answer on that. It's all gonna have to do with, how the vehicle's used. The number one factor in how long that clutch is going to live is the guy that's putting his left foot on the pedal. That's going to be the biggest thing. Are they slipping the clutch to get the car moving? Using it a lot at the racetrack, things like that are going to have a huge effect on what the life might be. But the driver is probably one of the biggest factors in that. Now, of course, if you don't have the car clutched properly, if you select something that's not adequate for whatever your power level is or what your use is, that's also going to drastically affect how long or how short the life of the clutch is.
And to dig in a little bit more there, I think, Paul, it goes back to what we talked about earlier, and that is the expectations and getting the information from the customer so we can do the best possible job we can of recommending the right clutch. Now, let's assume that we do all that up front and everything is as optimized as possible. Something that's very important and sometimes often overlooked is the braking process. So no matter what the clutch is, right or wrong for that matter, the braking process is super important because while just about everything we make it in the USA, in Columbia, South Carolina. We make our flywheels in-house. We feel like we make some of the nicest flywheels on the, in the marketplace. They are very flat. The pressure plate is very flat. The discs, however, are where the inadequacies are. There's a lot of peaks and valleys. So the braking process helps make them virtually as flat as the flywheel and the pressure plate. So that's the key. If you're buying a 10.5-inch clutch or an 11-inch clutch, no matter how big it is, we want to make sure we use as much of those surfaces, the available surfaces in the unit. So the braking process that doesn't guarantee, but it puts us in the best possible position to take advantage of all of the area available. So if somebody goes out there and puts a new clutch in there, this happens frequently. Somebody puts a clutch in there and of course they want to go out there and rip the tires off, right? They want to check out the installation. That's not going to be in the best interest or of the clutch, right? At that point, they run the risk of glazing it, maybe not ultimately getting the clutch as flat as it can be. So that's an important process. We like to think we get the right clutch in there, and then if the customer goes through the break-in process, all we can try and do is maximize the opportunity to get as much life out of that clutch as possible. And we have people that have had clutches in there for years, longer than we could ever think a clutch can last. But that's because we were engaged at the beginning, got the right clutch in there, they wait in the braking process, and thousands of miles and years the clutch can last if done correctly.
Ooh, break-in. Almost forgot to talk about clutch break-in. So let's dive into that topic a little bit more. Is it a standard thing or does it vary depending on the clutch design and the friction material?
Not particularly. Basically what you're trying to do is get some heat cycles on the unit to start. Think of it a lot like when you're bedding in a set of brakes. What we'd say is, take the car out, drive it around your neighborhood, lots of shifts, get the system up to temperature, come back, let it cool completely down. This is helping to set the metal in the pressure ring so it's not going to try to warp or glaze too quick. Do that process 2 or 3 times. And then at that point, you just need to put a few miles on it of driving, several hundred, probably ideally. Jumping on the highway and going from here somewhere 100 miles away is not going to do the job. It needs to be driven where you're shifting the car and again, letting those friction materials seat and make a complete flat contact across the flywheel on the pressure plate surface.
All right, so we've talked about the clutch system, but taking a step back and getting a more holistic view of the entire vehicle, say we've done all our homework, we selected the right clutch for our needs, and we had a professional installer do it properly. Is there anything else you should consider when looking at upgrading your clutch? Like, say, for example, you go to launch at the track and all of a sudden you're spitting U-joints across the lane. Anything like that come to mind?
Well, that used to be a lot more prevalent back in the older days when, a lot of what we sold were, solid center 3-paddle metallic clutch discs and were super aggressive, and also real high clamp pressures were used. So I don't think that's quite as prevalent as it has been in the past, but again, you kind of drop back to the driver again a little bit. If they're spending, every trip down the road as a $5,000 launch off the stoplight, that's obviously stressing U joints, rear end parts, and ultimately could cause some failures there. But I don't think that's quite as big of a factor now, because we really try to balance the static pressure and the friction material that's used in the clutch to help avoid that kind of situation.
And something else we've done, Paul, in all of our designs, especially when it comes to dual disc, is that all clutches are not created equal. So our dual discs are manufactured in a certain way. And what I mean by that is we have a combination clutch pack. We have a solid hub, and we have a sprung hub. So the sprung hub is almost like, it acts like the harmonic balancer on your engine. The sprung hub is able to absorb a lot of shock and noise you might get through the driveline, and it helps soften and make a little bit more cushy regarding those other components you're talking about. So whether it be one of our concept units, whether it's the 9.5 or the 10.5 or the Pro Street, all of our dual discs from a street standpoint are manufactured in that capacity. So we feel like we add another layer of insurance regarding the bell housing back part security, if you want to call it that.
All right, so we've been going for well over 30 minutes now. Is there a certain aspect of clutch design or transmission driveline that we haven't discussed yet you want to bring up?
Let's talk about the flywheel a little bit, because that's something that often gets overlooked. The flywheel is really important. I mean, that's 1/3 of the clutch system. And it's super important that flywheel is going to be, number one, structurally, integrity structurally is going to be good. So you're going to want to be looking to use a billet steel or possibly a billet aluminum flywheel, depending on where the application is being used. But real important things about the flywheel, number one, is a good surface ground finish. This is something that every flywheel you get from us is going to have. It's that kind of swirl pattern looking finish you may have seen looking at flywheels in the past. But that is done by putting that flywheel on a fixture in a surface grinder that grinds that flywheel parallel to the crank flange, so that when you bolt that flywheel on the motor, there's going to be absolute minimal amount of run out. That's going to ensure that the clutch is going to engage smoothly, and it's also going to greatly aid in how quickly the clutch is able to seat, so your braking procedure goes a whole lot better there. The balance is also very, very important in the flywheel. Every flywheel we build, that's the very last thing that's done. It goes on the balancer. It's going to balance to a very tight specification, whether it's an internal balance motor or if it's a factory external balance, like some of the Fords or Chevy applications. We're going to balance that flywheel to that exact factory specification. So the big thing is that making sure that the flywheel you select is indeed ready to go on the motor out of the box. There are certainly flywheels out there that don't meet those specs. So I just say, do your homework good before you make your flywheel selection.
And one last thing about the flywheel selection is a common mistake, or we get customers asking or thinking they might want some particular type of flywheel, that being a light aluminum type of flywheel. Once again, in most cases, especially for the street, that's not going to be the best choice. It isn't uncommon for somebody to get an aluminum flywheel and have that buyer's remorse, like you said earlier. I don't know if we've ever had somebody buy a flywheel that was heavier than they initially thought they needed, put it in the car, and have buyer's remorse. They usually wind up saying, you know what, you were right. I never realized that was the right way to go, because again, that's the foundation of everything. So if somebody's on the fence about what flywheel to select, and it's going to be driven on the street in any capacity, don't ever hesitate to go with the heavier flywheel. You will not be sorry.
That's really good advice. So thank you for that insight. Any more clutch topics to talk about before we begin to wrap things up?
Well, yeah, actually, one last thing. Paul, I've been a Ram customer for over 30 years. I've known Mike and Pat and the company for, again, 3 decades. And my first introduction to them was through the really fast car type stuff, drag racing stuff, billet clutches. I feel like that we do that really well. We do everything really well, but I feel like a lot of people put us in that box. I think something that is important for the audience to know is that it almost took me going to work for Ram to understand the diverseness of what we do. While it's great to sell a clutch to a really fast race car, drag race car, we do a lot more things for the street market. All these other markets that are available out there, whether it's OE, whether it's spirited street driving, street strip, and again, there's nothing that we can't do. So I feel like it's important for the audience to know that, again, there's nothing that we can't handle from a clutch standpoint.
So say we've successfully whetted someone's appetite to go out and upgrade and or replace their clutch. Where would you recommend folks start this process?
Our website's really a wealth of knowledge in terms of instruction sheets, in terms of being able to contact us technically, but several different forms we have that you can use that can get you a really fast information back. Of course, email is fine. We don't ever mind talking to people on the phone, but I would encourage you to visit the ramclutches.com website, as well as checking out our YouTube page, which is also Ram Clutches. And like we mentioned earlier, there's a wealth of videos there. I think there's 200 or better videos up there right now. And they cover everything from little installation and technical questions that we get to really good product descriptions about some of the parts we've talked about here. So ramclutches.com, and then, of course, our YouTube page. You can also find us on all the typical social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all those cool places.
Not being a youth myself, I have no idea what TikTok is, but I'm glad to see you guys are hip with it. One more thing, I would have a very unpleasant conversation with my boss if I failed to mention that, of course, you can buy Ram clutches at summitracing.com.
Absolutely. Summit's certainly been a very long time supporter of Ram. I was thinking about that this morning before we got on here, that I believe the first time I ever came to Summit to do seminars for your sales force was probably somewhere around the mid 1980s. So it's been quite a ride, and we certainly appreciate the support that Summit's given us over the years.
Well, when you win, we win, and the whole gearhead community wins, I think, as a result. And that'll do it. We've been talking all about clutch tech with our pals from Ram Clutches, Mike Norcia and Matt Giangrande. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thanks, Paul. We appreciate you having us on.
Yep. Thanks again, Paul. We enjoyed it.
This has been the On All Cylinders podcast,
Powered by Summit Racing.
Check out new episodes coming soon at OnAllCylinders.com.
OnAllCylinders.com.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time.